welcome, Virtual Space Hero community, to our first LinkedIn Live for this 2023. And we are filled with fantastic topics. And this is also because of you. So thank you very much to all of you for your suggestions, for your remarks on what topics we should cover on our Virtual Space Hero stage, and also for proposing us really fantastic guests for our stage. You know that through our webpage, if you go to virtualspacehero.com, you can check out all the guests for 2023. We have a lineup filled up with amazing remote work and virtual learning experts until the month of June already, always happening Thursdays with a small 1 month break in May. But if you go to that webpage, check them out and also let me know if there is any other expert you would love to see here in our fall winter session 2023. On the webpage, you have a form that you can fill out, or even if you want to propose yourself, we are happy to receive your requests. And today we are starting strong off the year with a super hot topic. I got a lot of questions already beforehand because some people are not able to join the live conversation and to place their questions here. So there is always the possibility that you send me your questions beforehand, and I'm super happy to include them and make sure that we pick up on those questions during our live event. Well, last year we have been talking with experts from across the globe about remote work and hybrid work. And many of those experts, they work in an international context. They lead or consult with global virtual teams. And of course, as we know, particularly the global outreach and the virtual work bring together also the element of interculturality in our teams. And there is one topic that we are aware of. It is probably in most cultures a rather sensitive topic. It is about how we give feedback, because we do know that everybody, every culture to some extent, and every person likes to develop and wants to receive feedback that helps us to develop us further. But on the other hand, it is always a difficult topic because across cultures, we are used to give feedback differently. And above that, and altogether with that, there comes also the remote context, right? Because giving feedback in an in-present setting is already something, can be something complicated. But what do we do if we work virtually together? And I'm more than excited to have with me an expert, a global expert on communication and facilitation, Lech Gudzowski, who is connecting today from Gdansk, Poland, and will share his expertise and experience with us. Hi, Lech.
Hello. Afternoon, morning, good evening. I don't know. It's late afternoon, early evening for us too. But I don't know where the listeners are. And thank you very much for having me on the show. And really well done on filling your pipeline of guests for so many months in advance. Really well done.
Yeah, it was amazing. So I just put out the date, and the dates were gone in like a week's time. So Lech, it is a pleasure, and thank you so much for taking time in your calendar and follow my invitation to join me on the LinkedIn Live stage here. It is a great topic that we are going to talk about. But first, I would love to know, how did you get into the area of communication, particularly the area of giving feedback across cultures? What was your journey?
I used to be a project manager in marketing for many years, and after that, I transitioned into a role in IT industry where I was managing. I was kind of the linchpin between the IT teams that we had, but also the wider business. And I was always naturally kind of drawn to the element of, why do projects fall over? Why do deadlines get missed? Where do the frustrations come from? And to me, it was always about the wider culture of the way we work as teams, but also within the organization. And I was always drawn to that. And a few years ago, I decided to go kind of into full into that line of work, into workplace culture facilitation. And obviously, communication is a huge part of it, and feedback leads into that as well. And that kind of connects me to those marketing days where, in a way, we need to think about who we talk to, how we talk to them, same as we do it in marketing, right? We've got a target audience. We know who they are. We know what triggers them in good and bad ways, and we kind of need to adjust that message. And that element of company culture, communication, feedback kind of connects with all of that quite nicely.
Oh wow, that is great. And so you are working today or most of the days of the year out of Gdansk, but your clients and the companies you work with are based across the globe, I understand.
Indeed. So I'm kind of all over the place. I'm in Gdansk at the moment, but I usually kind of move around a little bit, kind of slow travel, nomadic type of lifestyle. UK is my base and has been for many years. And I am originally from Poland. I've been born and raised in Poland, but then for a better part of 15 years, I've been living in the UK. So I've got that mixture of those two cultures. I was raised in one place, I grew up in one place, and then kind of became an adult in my working life. I was always in the UK, and being exposed to that, seeing these two worlds, already kind of gives me an indication of where the difficulties come from. I've been lucky enough that I had fantastic English teachers, and I'm stubborn enough to master the English language to a level of a native, not just in terms of the language itself, but on a cultural level as well. And that gives me insight to how British people think versus, for example, how Polish people think, and where the differences are, and kind of potential for miscommunication as a result. And obviously, it doesn't happen just between these two countries, but any two different cultures or countries that we've got.
Mm-mm. If you think about when you moved to the UK, I'd love to hear what was your first experience, not necessarily about feedback, but in terms of communication differences when you moved there and started working there, interacting with other professionals.
Oh, that's a good question. You're going to take me back now. This goes back to, it's probably when I was about 18 or 19. That was the first time I landed in the UK, only still for a few months. And that was obviously working as most people do at kind of early stages in their career in a bar or a restaurant. I think at that level, it was the difficulty in communication. First of all, is still getting used to the language itself, but then also kind of the signals, right? How British people are and how Polish people are, just to minimize it to these two groups, where Polish people are very direct, to the point. We don't beat around the bush, whilst the British are sort of the opposite of that. They're very polite, very well mannered. They're kind of two levels to British people, I would say, where you've got the kind of outer, what the world sees, but then there's the internal part, what they really think and feel, what's going on for them. Some things that they, for example, they might not want to show, and therefore they don't want to offend anyone. They don't like confrontation, and therefore they might kind of be just polite, but on the surface they think and believe something different. And what I say, being direct in my way, is actually very contrarian to that, and a lot of people would class me as rude because I was just simply being too direct.
But I'm just thinking back about it, what you were saying in terms of getting used to the language and the communication culture in general. And I'm just thinking about the two of us. So, well, even though we're not English natives, we have a rather advanced level of English. And both of us, I think that would be probably, or that maybe is also your challenge. We are super fast speakers, aren't we? I just
We
feel
are.
like in a conversation now, we're even getting faster and faster and faster. But to slow down and just to relate it to a question, when we talk about communication in global virtual teams, I just need to think about one of my French clients. It's a multinational where we were running trainings for them, and for global virtual teamwork. And one of the points that came up is that it's particularly difficult in global virtual teams to work together with native speakers, because many native speakers, or those who have a very advanced level of English, as it is it's in most of the cases the common language in multinational companies, they usually tend to speak way too fast with way too many idioms and way too many technical terms and difficult sentence constructions or constructs, where non-native speakers often get lost or misunderstandings are happening. What is your experience as a workplace culture facilitator when you work with teams who are working internationally and have those English as a lingua franca challenge, to say so?
It's a mixed one, because sometimes I meet people, luckily enough, that just genuinely don't care. They just kind of, they know English is their second language. They're good at it, but they really don't have that inhibition of making mistakes, of being misunderstood. And so that's a great quality to have. It's something, for example, that I'm struggling with, because I'm currently, or actually currently for the past few years, I've been attempting to learn Italian, and I've blocked myself mentally from being able to speak. Now I've started working with a language teacher again, and literally within a space of 2 or 3 lessons, that kind of block has lifted. But still, that inhibition, that anxiety, the stress was there. So that's the first thing I think that I see in a lot of teams, is that people don't want to say something that when inhibition, things that challenge and make communication challenging, I don't want them say something that will make me look silly. That's in
Mhm.
general in your native language. Add on top of that the concept of doing it in a different language, and also doing it virtually. That just compounds it even further, because you are missing a lot of the social cues. It's a little bit more, you don't feel the person in front of you. You're staring at a camera. It's not the same. And I think, as much as it is on the part of the foreigner, the non-native speaker, to kind of overcome these barriers for themselves within the realm of what they own. Obviously, as native speakers, yes, we need to look out for that. As a facilitator, I'm guilty of that. Even here now, I know that I've
Mhm.
started talking really fast. I had to slow myself down. All the things that you said in terms of idioms, phrases, you have to simplify the language.
Language,
Uh,
yeah.
but it's sometimes difficult to do when you're in the midst of delivering something. On top of that, you're passionate about it. You really believe in that topic. You can see the group come alive. You build that up. You forget, right? You just kind of go, quite literally, you go with the flow. But then it's useful to have that self-awareness as a facilitator, but then also have somebody maybe in the room with you who monitors you, kind of goes, slow down a little
Yeah.
bit. I've had that. I remember that when I was still a project manager. I was leading workshops, and I had a lady it was a French company that I worked for. She was kind of my colleague running the project I was delivering in the UK, and she would be sitting at the end, the back of the room, and go, slow down every single time, every 5-10 minutes. She's like, slow down. Okay, thank you. Very useful. Very useful.
That is very good. I just need to think and to just show you, because this is also one of the things. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't. Pause, signpost, slow down.
Nice.
And
Very
so you
nice.
have it there. And I think it makes a slight difference, since I again put it on post-its. I had that and I took it off. And it makes a difference, because even though you know it as a facilitator, you should slow down, you should pause, embrace the pause, or in global virtual teams or in virtual teamwork, sometimes you forget about that. And so it's a
Hmm.
nice reminder.
Yeah.
We have a great comment here from Lech, because we were mentioning feedback, and Ivan Antonio Rojas, thank you so much for your comment, is asking, feedback and feed forward. Finally, it's the same. It's important, works together. Lech, what is your, as a communication facilitator or workplace communication facilitator, feedback and feed forward? What is your perspective here?
Mm, they play a massive part. There's no doubt about it. I think we don't give enough feedback, but either way, and it's something that it's missing, and we find it difficult. We avoid it. It's linked to other things related to conflict within teams as well, that we'd rather sweep things under the carpet rather than confront it, right? And I think the remote setting, I don't have any data, but I just go by gut feeling that it potentially made it worse, because it's easier to hide from feedback, either positive or negative, especially negative feedback, I would say, because we jump off that Zoom meeting, we turn off the cameras, and when we're done, right? We don't have to sit in the office among other people. Therefore, that intentionality of how we give feedback in general, that feedback culture that we build within an organization, whether it's feedback or feed forward, needs to happen. It needs to be really intentional. I'm not massive for structures and processes, but I'm big for intentionality, that we really need to pay more attention to things like that.
Just to come back to the two terms, feedback and feed forward. What is the technical difference for our audience here?
In terms of feedback, obviously we feed things into on what happened. The way I understand it is we have situations that have occurred, that we've noticed something that we want to bring to somebody else's attention. We kind of we share that. Positive or constructive, negative. Feed forward, the way I understand it, is we kind of spread that. What's the word? Not initiative, but spread that kind of positive vibe in terms of encouragement, in terms of the things that we notice that the person can build on, and kind of pass that on, build that into positive feedback. Because we tend to ask people whether, do you mind if I give you some feedback? And you know that if they ask that, that tends to be negative stuff. We don't talk enough about the positive stuff. That's for sure.
There's also Sue. Thank you very much. Sue is also asking, can you give an example of feed forward? So what I understood now from your explanation is that feedback by trend is rather oriented towards the past. Feed forward would be something that we also rather talk about action steps towards the future. Could you maybe put that into context and give an example about the idea of feed forward?
An example of feed forward. I think maybe if we link it a little bit to, we often do retrospectives where we look back, but I like also the concepts of what's called the pre-mortem that I used to do sometimes with projects, where we look at, we've got a project that is about to start. We get in a room and say, okay, if everything imaginable could go wrong, what will happen? What would those things be? How would that affect us in the project? And I would look to kind of feed forward in that context. Okay, we've noticed all of these things. What can we do about them? And potentially, who can we talk to about, who we can kind of raise things with, based on, okay, it's going to be sitting with that person. There's a certain quality, there's a certain kind of amount of work. It will go towards certain people. Then we can kind of address that ahead of time.
Okay, so also it is, again, feed forward. We focus on the future, we focus on improvement, while feedback always, to some extent, is about the past and past behaviors that were not accomplishing a certain goal, to say so. Sue, I hope this is answering your question here as well. And Sue is also one of the ones having problems with the speed challenge. Yeah, we need to think about that absolutely when we are speaking. Thanks for sharing here as well your thoughts and your questions. So we talked about feedback, feed forward. Now let's dive into the topic a little bit deeper. When we talk about feedback techniques in general, and you're facilitating workplace communication, so most of us to some extent have heard about the feedback sandwich. It was all over the place in the 80s and 90s, or later maybe. What is a state-of-the-art technique when it comes to giving feedback in general? Let's very generally.
I'm not a fan of the feedback sandwich. There's also another term.
And why is that? Why is that? We would love to hear why.
I'll tell you, simply because I believe that if you sandwich it, something positive, something negative, something positive again, people are smart. They've caught on to this already, and even if the positive things that you mention are true and honest and relevant, they get devalued by that negative emotion, the negative charge that comes with the negative feedback in the middle. It's got its place. I think it works in different cultures differently, where you need more of that. For example, I would say more in, for example, cultures like in Britain, it's more likely to happen. In cultures like Poland, you will prefer just kind of just give it to me, whatever it is, just give it to me. So I'll be really mindful of how we use that. in the context of who we work with and kind of cross-culturally as well. What and not just within what cultures what countries we work with, because obviously within the same country we can have people from different cultures, and that's really important to look at. For me, the most important thing is just setting the context, right? So the feedback that we give, and I know this sounds basic, but I still see it not being done well enough, that we don't have concrete examples of what we want to give feedback on, right? That we need to, whatever we're talking about, we need to set that in the immediate context, right? Give examples to the person, say, when you said this in that room, in that meeting, at that time, the person can recall that straight away. So it, they meet us, they're on the same page. And even better, don't wait. Don't let it snowball. Just do it on the spot. Radical Candor by Kim Scott, I believe, is a great book. Divisive for many, but still, that she talks about that concept. You know what? Just do it. It's when you do it on the spot. If something happens in the meeting, stay after the meeting. Do you mind if we have a chat for 2 minutes? And it'll literally be 2 minutes. Versus if you leave it until you're one-on-one, the following week, it's kind of already grown. It's snowballing a little bit potentially. But the worst of all, the person that you're giving that feedback to already forgotten what happened. You need to you spending time and energy to bring them back onto that page that you're on. You've been sitting with it for the past week. They have not. And that's the key. So if you can do it then and there, it's much easier, much simpler, much quicker, and far more productive.
So those are the two super basic and more important, very important roles. I think it's also interesting what you were saying. Well, that sounds like super basic. Everybody knows. And I always need to think about one of my colleagues, Elise Keith. She's a meeting innovator, one of the really the heroes in the field of meeting management in general. And she is one in her blog article she wrote. It was about meeting, but anyways, it applies to so much. And we don't have a knowing gap. We have a knowing doing gap. So even in leadership, in many of the trainings, I feel myself to say like, well, this might sound basic to you, but it is basic, but nobody does it. So I think this is really the great challenge there. And Sue here is also mentioning again and replying to what you were saying. Yes, indeed, context is important. I like the quick timing tip. There is a cultural component for sure. US folks might need something positive as a way to validate the individual. And there again, there is this cultural element coming in that we need to consider. Thanks a lot, Sue, for your contribution here again. So let me just come back to the question. So we were talking about feedback techniques. You said you're not a fan of the sandwich. So what other techniques, using those 2 ground rules that you already mentioned, or 3 ground rules, would you suggest us to look at when it comes to good feedback giving? And also for all the audience out there, while Lech is I'm giving him like 30 seconds to think about my question. You see here, I have floating in one webpage, human.pm/CMP. There are communication micro practices that are published on Lech's webpage that you can check out, that surely also help you to improve the communication in your virtual, hybrid, or on-site team or organization. So Lech, what are other feedback techniques that you would like us to think about?
Actually, it's quite nicely that you brought up the cultural micro practices that I share, because recently I came across Netflix's 4A feedback principles, and I've put that as one of the micro practices. And I've never heard of it before, literally up until about 3 or 4 weeks ago. It was in one of the books, I don't remember the name, written about Netflix, and it was kind of described what Netflix's culture is. And one of the things that was mentioned there is the kind of the 4A framework, and the 4A's stands for attention, amplification, alignment, and accountability. And it's to set the feedback in these four frames. Let me just pull that up just to make sure that I've got it correctly. Attention stands for that the feedback should focus on pointing the most important aspects of the work. And this is again something that when we give and when we receive feedback, I think we misunderstand it. Feedback is not it should not be personal. It should be about the work, not the person. The tangible that's in front of us, not an attack, because that's the problem. Then we've got the second A, which is amplification, and it should provide suggestion how to improve the work to make it better. again, following that thread. Alignment, it should align with the companies, obviously, why their goals and values. Can be the companies, can be closer to home, can be the team's way of operating. And accountability, obviously, it should be how kind of the work that the person does that can be implemented here, who should be responsible for that, and how kind of that connects to the success of it. And I think it's very similar to the other techniques where you set the context, you give examples and things like that. It's just another way of looking at grouping it in a slightly different way, which I think gives a little bit more flexibility in terms of which bit you deliver when, because it tends to be usually kind of the coin method, for example, is context, objective, and whatever the other letters stand for. It's very kind of structured, and again, it resembles a little bit the sandwich that we mentioned earlier.
That sounds very interesting. Never heard about that either. So the 4A Netflix feedback method. Love that. Thank you very much for sharing that with us here as well. We have here a question from Ivan about: do you use any tool to create or register feedback with groups or with one person? For example, a canvas or anything else, or do you have a structure? I think that is what Ivan is referring to.
It depends on how I do it. So in my work normally, so for example, on a day-to-day when I do a workshop, I tend to keep it very, very simple. If I use a mirror board, for example, I love to know what I do well and what I do badly as a facilitator, and I literally ask people to do that for me at the end before I let them go. Quite literally, I don't say, can you do that later? Do you mind spending 2 minutes here and now? And it's 3 questions. What did you like? What could I do better? Any other comments? And I'll give them 2 minutes to do that. So that's on a personal level. In terms of incorporating feedback into the kind of the wider work that I do with clients, there are in most cases, I tend to rely on whatever the client has already within the organization, whatever systems there are, simply because I don't like to add another tool unless they completely haven't got anything. Then we can go down that route. But we tend to rely on whatever processes we've got there. I'm a massive fan of just keeping it as simple as possible. And I know this is a divisive topic, but for me, feedback should not be anonymous. I think we should be living in a world where we've got the courage to say what we believe, what we disagree with, but also have the courage to listen to that. Right. And without when we share it, without feeling that it's going to be used against us. I think that's the wrong way we're going. And I know anonymizing feedback does help and has value, but I've got issues with that, and my preference always lies with doing.
But isn't that also a fun intercultural statement? Because in some countries, giving feedback to individuals might be perceived as aggressive, losing face, and stuff like that. And we, as from our Westerners, cultural general perspective, we of course believe that feedback should be frank, open, honest, respectful, blah blah blah, but also more or less direct, right? So this is also, it's always interesting, how do we teach or talk about certain topics that are intercultural topics, taking our own intercultural standpoint or point of view into consideration, right?
In Polish, we've got an expression directly translated is that a shoemaker walks around barefoot, which means that we often we preach something, but we don't follow our rules. And you're absolutely right. I'm guilty of that. I mostly work with clients where feedback is the way I describe. I haven't worked with cultures where, for example, in Japan, where what I'm talking about, God no, I'd be fired very, very quickly from that job, or wouldn't even get it in the first place. There's no doubt about that.
I think here's also, thank you very much, Veronica, for posting the comment here. It was marked as a question, but a very good book is Erin Meyer, professor at INSEAD, who wrote a book about how to work across cultures. I don't know the exact title. A fantastic book that she very practically applies the dimensions that she took from
the culture map.
Yeah, the culture map, exactly.
Yes,
thank you.
One,
and of course, added her own research as well. And one of her dimensions is particularly about giving feedback. What I find very interesting about her approach is, although some academics not particularly like, or she's in some academic circles, I would say she's highly criticized. But what I think is very interesting about her cultural dimensions is she distinguishes between communicating and how to give feedback, because she's indeed found out or compared different data sets that people in some countries, they might communicate very directly, but when it comes to feedback, they are rather indirect. And in some countries, they might be rather indirect in general, but when it comes to feedback, they are rather direct. And I think this was some of the novelties from her research. And the book is really good. It's easy to read, lots of practical implications that I like. So maybe this is also something that those of you out there who want to look into the feedback aspect, she has also several Harvard Business Review articles published on the topic that you can look into. So Erin Meyer, The Culture Map. There is also Sue's posting it here again. Thank you very much for putting this in here. And also here we have Jeff. Thanks so much for the comment. Yeah, feedback. It's very contextual based on where someone is located. Exactly. And I just think for us as facilitators, trainers, workshoppers, whatever, it's so important that we consider this aspect as well, right? Like it's the same when we look at research. So a lot of research about Eastern cultures comes from Western cultures. So in research, we also have that Western bias in the way that we are doing research, in the way that we're describing challenges or problems or anything like that. And there is again Veronica adding a comment. Thank you so much. She's the co-author of the Netflix book too, right? One of the last
There we go.
Netflix
Small
books
world.
that came out last year. That's right. Veronica, if you have already read that, share with us your insights. I have only seen the publicity, so I have not even read the short version of it. Thanks a lot for sharing that. Totally true. Let us to sum up today's session a little bit, because we at Virtual Space Show, we work a lot with intercultural global virtual teams, right? So like when we talk about virtual work and we combine all those challenges that we were talking about when we have international teams, when it comes to a virtual context, what is it that you would be suggesting how to give and receive feedback in that virtual context?
I'll come back to that intentionality that I've mentioned before. Is because we don't have these random, unplanned interactions, the so-called water cooler moments in the office anymore, where we there's more space to give and share stuff, even indirectly when you kind of mention something in passing. We don't have that in the virtual setting. So having more of practice. If you're a leader and you have one where you lead teams, you've got one-on-ones. Make sure that you incorporate that into your meetings, right? To both to give that feedback, but then also ask feedback. What you could do better as a leader, because that's missing. And I think to mention the point that I believe it was Jeff who made that comment about that. Feedback is very culture dependent. Absolutely. We often hear this phrase that I could give feedback the way, or do things the way I would like them to be done to me, which is a nice starting point. But then I would kind of move beyond that and think, okay, because you are direct doesn't mean that, and you like feedback to be given directly to you, doesn't mean that you should give it to the other person that way because they're from a different country where that doesn't happen. So go beyond that. Think about, you don't need to know the ins and outs of somebody's culture, but just be curious about that culture. And it's more prevalent in the virtual setup, in the remote setup, because we're likely simply going to be working with people from different cultures, from different countries. Just get to know them a little bit and simply ask them, listen, how do you want me to give you feedback? I've spotted something I want to share with you. How do you want me to do that now? Or if you've done it and clearly something's gone wrong, you offended the person, or the relationship's kind of been affected and it's breaking down, what have I done wrong? Tell me. And how would you like me to do it in the future? Genuinely, feedback is communication overall.
And I love that. I think this is really the perfect approach to really ask the other person, how do they really want to receive the feedback? How do they appreciate getting feedback? I think that's a very important one. And this is like the number one rule, right? If we don't ask for feedback about the way we give feedback as well, like afterwards, we cannot improve either. So this is a fantastic closure, I would say. Also considering the last element that I would bring to this topic is, I just remembered now, I had a fantastic LinkedIn live, I think over 1.5 years ago, with Joel Silverstone, and we were talking about active listening and how important active listening is, particularly in a virtual context. So also really really thinking about how can you make sure that you listen to the person without immediately reacting or debating or anything, but rather listen, absorbing, and trying to understand. And I think the active listening approach and asking for their preferred way of communication or way of getting feedback is really of utmost importance. So we have here again, I'm just pulling those comments up here. Immediate feedback means spot on for some cultures. I couldn't imagine giving one to a Japanese. Exactly. So also here again, back to what Lech was saying, observing and also asking what do they like to how the counterpart or your team member, your colleague, your superior would like to get the feedback. And last but not least, Sue, thank you very much. Respectful curiosity. Yes, working with Japanese clients, it takes a shift in expectations and trust to get feedback directness. I want to know more about feed forward, as that could set context. Though I won't call it a pre-mortem. Of course, yeah.
It's a bit of a drastic term, that's for sure.
It's a very drastic term, yeah. Thank you so much, Sue. And please let us know what your research about feed forward, and particularly then when you implement it in your practice, what does it show and how does it feel? For all of you out there, you know Lech is tagged in this LinkedIn event. You can find him also via human.pm/CMP, the communication micro practices. Check them out, and afterwards let us know if you implement it or are using some of them. Lech, for you again, a very big thank you for being with us here on the Virtual Space Hero stage. It was a pleasure talking to you, opening the year 2023, and I wish you all the best. As you know, I have a virtual cocktail prepared backstage. I'll be there with you in a second.
Lovely being here. Thank you very much for having me on.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So, Virtual Space Hero community, thank you so much for your active contribution before, during, and maybe even afterwards. I'm looking for your comments. And as I said, please really let me know what topics you would like to hear. As I said, until June, the whole stages are booked out. But from September onwards, we are going to discuss more topics all around hybrid, virtual remote teams, and virtual learning as well. Next week, we will continue the conversation and we will dive into the remote office and bringing your employees back to the office discussion with Nancy Settle Murphy. So a fantastic colleague from the US who will be connecting with us. At this point, the only thing that leaves me to say is, well, don't forget to become a virtual space hero and check out what is planned until June 2023. Thank you very much for being with us. Bye.